Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Crime and Punishment story. This week I am covering the very sad story of John Tindle and the murder of Dorothy Tindle, also known as Leithhead, which took place in Sunderland in 1899. I hope you will find it interesting. But before we begin, can I just say, if you do enjoy this video, then please give it a thumbs up. And if you are new here or haven't already done so, then do please consider subscribing to the channel to help support the content we create. Thank you. It is completely free to subscribe. It doesn't cost you any money, but it really does help to support the channel. And I would just like to add, as I always do now, that I do record these stories live, so I do sometimes make mistakes, which I always try to rectify, so I hope this does not spoil your enjoyment of the video. John Tindle was said to be around 47 years old at the time the crime was committed, so would have been born in around 1852. He was born in Sunderland, and his parents and other family members are unknown. John worked as a bricklayer, although his place of work is unknown, and in the 1891 census he is stated as being a stonemason. He was described as being only around 5'1" in height, with brown hair and blue eyes. He was not described as being someone who drank a lot, but it was very clear that he did enjoy a drink or two. Dorothy Leithhead was born in around 1855 in Sunderland to parents Andrew and Barbara, and was one of at least 9 children. It's not clear when she first met John Tindle, but by 1881 she is living with him and their son William in Sunderland. She does not appear to have had a job. And although she is mainly known in the newspapers at the time as Dorothy Tindle, the couple do not appear to have ever officially been married. It is not really uncommon for a couple to live together and claim to be married, but in this case they had apparently been living together for over 25 years. On November the 7th, John gave Dorothy 10 shillings for her housekeeping. He had been employed for several days prior to this, but it seems that his employment in 1899 was quite sporadic. He told Dorothy that he had bought himself a new lathing hammer and that he planned to go to his new job the following day. A lathe or lathing hammer was used for trimming strips of wood for interior wall construction, and as you can see, it looked slightly different in shape to an everyday hammer. The following day, November the 8th, John said he was too ill to work, and instead he left the house early in the morning. He returned at lunchtime, but finding no meal ready for him, he went out again. When he had not returned at 8 p.m, Dorothy and Mrs. Armstrong, who the couple were living with at the time, went out together to the Union Flag public house. Dorothy was carrying a beer can, which she was hoping to get filled at the expense of Mrs. Armstrong. Outside the pub, they found John. He asked Dorothy for some money, and she told him that she didn't have any. She went into the pub and came out again a few minutes later. Her beer can was empty, as Mrs. Armstrong had not paid for it to be filled. And when John saw this, he got very angry and swore at Dorothy, telling her to get herself home, and he followed the two women back towards their home. In the back lane, John suddenly took the can from Dorothy and hit her over the head with it, knocking her to the ground, and he then ran away. Mrs. Armstrong helped Dorothy into the house, and she lay down on the sofa. A few moments later, John came in, and Dorothy was heard to cry out, "Oh, John, don't kill me!" Dorothy fell to the floor, bleeding badly, and John again ran away. Mrs. Armstrong, seeing Dorothy was badly injured, immediately went to find a policeman, and a doctor was sent for. Dorothy was taken to the Sunderland infirmary, where she died 2 days later from her injuries. John Tindle had been found in Sunderland and initially arrested for cutting and wounding his wife, and at first he had laughed, saying he had never touched her, but when he was officially charged with her willful murder, he said he had only hit her with his fist, and that she had fallen and hit her head on the side of the sofa. The inquest was held at the Sunderland infirmary before Coroner Maynard. Margaret Johnson of Monk Wearmouth said she had identified the body as being that of her sister Dorothy, who she said was around 44 years old. She said she had not seen her sister for around 8 years. Mary Armstrong said she lived with her husband Simpson in the same house as the Tindles in Sunderland. She said the couple had recently been living with them as they had been put out of their own rooms, and she said that their son William was away at the time in the Navy. She said John had not been at work much in recent months. However, he had done a small amount of work in the past few days, and he had bought some tools for a new job he said he was going to. She said she had heard him say to Dorothy, "Well, Dolly, I am going to go straight to work on Monday morning with these." However, she said on Monday morning he did not go to work. She said that around 9:30 a.m. on that morning, Dorothy had asked him if he was going to work, and she said John had told her he was not going in as he was not well enough. Mary said he went out shortly after this. She said the couple did not argue about him not going to work and that they were on friendly terms when he left the house. She said he came home for some food at around 1:30 p.m, but there was no meal for him, so he went out again, and she said the couple did not argue then either. She said she did not see him again until around 8 p.m, and she had gone to the public house with Dorothy and found John standing outside. She said he came over to Dorothy and said, "Have you any good in your mind? Can you get me a glass of beer?" Dorothy told him that she had no money and that she, Mary, was going to pay for her drink. Mary said they then went inside the pub, leaving John outside, and they had one glass of beer each and then left. She said when they came back out, John was still there, and he took hold of the beer can Dorothy had been carrying and looked inside. When he found it was empty, he got very angry and told Dorothy, "If you don't get back up home, I'll kick your guts in." Mary said they both walked away from him, but he followed them. And once in the back lane near the house, John grabbed hold of the can and hit Dorothy over the head with it. The blow was hard enough to knock her to the ground. John ran away down the lane, and she helped Dorothy into the house and settled her on the sofa. Mary said she was busy stirring the fire when she heard Dorothy cry out, "Oh, John, don't kill me." She said as she turned round, she saw Dorothy fall to the floor, and John was placing his lathing hammer into his pocket. He ran out of the door, and she said she shouted after him that she was going for the police, but he didn't reply. She said she then went out to look for a policeman. Her husband, Simpson Armstrong, said he had been in bed in the room at the time the attack had happened. His evidence did not differ much from that of his wife. However, he did state that if John Tindle was saying that his wife had simply fallen from the sofa because she was drunk, then he was wrong. He said both Dorothy and his wife Mary were sober at the time. And he also added that he had not previously seen the couple argue since they had moved in to live with them on October the 30th. John Eastman of Sunderland, who described himself as someone who did odd jobs now and then, said he had met John on the Monday night after the attack had taken place. He said John had said to him, "Will you go up and see how our Dot is getting on? I think I have killed her." John said he had refused to go, although he did not actually explain why he would not go. He said John then showed him the hammer and again asked him to go and see how Dorothy was, and John said he refused again, and he then left. Albert Wynne of Coronation Street in Sunderland said it was around 9:30 p.m. when John came to his house. He said John asked him to buy the lathing hammer, but he said he refused. When asked why, he stated that he felt John was very drunk at the time, and he did not want to take advantage of him by buying the hammer when he clearly did not know what he was doing. He said he did not touch or look closely at the hammer, so was not able to say if it was blood-stained. P.C. Smallman said, acting on information received, he had gone to the home of the Armstrongs in Sunderland. He said when he arrived, the room was in darkness, no light at all, and no fire in the grate. The coroner spoke to him about this, as Mary Armstrong had stated the fire had been lit, but P.C. Smallman said it definitely was not, and he had had to strike a match to see around the room. He said he saw Dorothy lying on the floor on her back. She was bleeding badly from a wound on her face, and he said there also seemed to be signs of blood around the room. He sent for Dr. Beveridge, who arrived a short time later. He said there was no sign of John in the house, but he had seen him at the police station later that night, and to him he did not appear to be under the influence of drink. P.C. Woodward said he had found John in Sunderland. He did not seem to him to be trying to hide. He said he had arrested him for cutting and wounding Dorothy, and John had laughed and said he had not touched her. He said later, when he had been charged with her willful murder, John had changed his story and told him he had punched her in the face and she had fallen off the couch and hit her head. It seems that John had changed his statement at some point, saying he had not punched Dorothy and that she had simply fallen off the sofa because she was drunk, as this was mentioned in brief earlier at the inquest during Simpson Armstrong's evidence. However, I never found any actual statements of him saying this. Dr. Beveridge said he had been called to the house on the night of the 8th of November. He said he found Dorothy lying on the floor and she was bleeding badly from a deep wound on her face. He said the wound had been caused by some kind of irregular-shaped instrument, and he said it was his professional opinion that this wound could not have been caused by a punch from a fist. He did not state if he felt the lathe hammer could have been the instrument used to cause the injury. And he said he had ordered Dorothy to be taken to the infirmary where she had died 2 days later. Dr. Pearson of Sunderland Infirmary said he had performed the post-mortem on the body of Dorothy Tindle. He said the wound had penetrated deep into the bone around the nose, and he said death had been caused by concussion of the brain and blood loss. He added that Dorothy had been semi-conscious when she had first arrived at the infirmary, and he had tried to ask her how it had happened, but she had been unable to speak. I did not find any details of the coroner addressing the jury. However, we can assume he would have asked them to simply decide if they felt that John was responsible for the injury that had caused the death of Dorothy Tindle. And the jury retired for only a very short time before returning a verdict of guilty of willful murder against John Tindle, and he was committed for trial. Sadly, as has been the case often recently, I did not find any details of a funeral for Dorothy Tindle. Although she did have some family in the area, they may not have been in a position to pay for a funeral. So once more, this may have been a pauper's funeral. And I did not find any evidence of a headstone for Dorothy anywhere in the area. The trial took place in Durham later in November of 1899 before Justice Grantham. John pleaded not guilty to the charge of murder. As is often the case, the evidence given at the trial is mostly the same as that given at the inquest, so I will only add any new information, of which, unfortunately, there is not very much. Mary Armstrong gave the same evidence as at the inquest. However, and it is not really clear why, she was questioned about her own past life, admitting to the fact that she had been arrested at least 25 times for being drunk and had recently spent 3 months in prison for running a brothel from her home and for stealing a watch. The only reason that I can think of for these questions about Mary's past was to perhaps discredit her as a truthful witness. John Eastman gave the same evidence as at the inquest. He was also questioned about his feelings towards John Tindle, and he admitted that he did not much like him, as he had once punched him in the face. However, he denied that he had ever said that he would do him ill if he could. Again, this could only have been done to suggest that the evidence John gave was not truthful, as he did not like John Tindle. Sadly, this is one of those cases where no details from the prosecution, the defence or the judges summing up are given, and it is pretty hard to guess what any of them would have said from the basic amount of evidence that is given. It is very clear, however, that the defence were attempting to make any witness who spoke out against John sound like they simply didn't like him, or that their evidence could not be trusted. And it seems that this did have some effect on the jury, as after retiring for a very short time, they returned a verdict of guilty of manslaughter against John Tindle. The judge then sentenced John to 10 years penal servitude. John would later be sent to Dartmoor Prison and was released in May of 1907 after serving less than 8 years for the manslaughter of his wife. He was, it was stated, released to return to a job as a bricklayer. I did not find any further details of John Tindle after this date. This was a very odd case. There never seemed to be any evidence to explain why John suddenly attacked his wife. Some mention was made of the fact that she would not buy him a drink, but this surely could not be enough for him to attack her. And no evidence seems to have been given by anyone to suggest that the couple argued on a regular basis, although it does seem to be clear that John was not good at holding down a job and did seem to spend a lot of his time drinking. But Dorothy is never described as being someone who drank a lot. So what caused the attack? Was John simply drunk on the night it happened, angry that his wife would not buy him a drink, and lashed out at her, not truly aware of the damage he would cause by using the lathen hammer to hit her? This seems to be the only answer to why he attacked her. We can assume, as said earlier, it was the defence that tried to discredit the main witnesses, trying to suggest that at least one of them did not like John, and perhaps trying to get the jury to believe that they had it in for John, and maybe Dorothy had simply fallen. However, the doctor's evidence about her injuries would have made this argument pointless, but it did seem to still have some sway with the jury away from the willful murder charge. Do I think the main witness, Mary Armstrong, lied? Well, to be totally honest, I don't think she did. She may have been mistaken about the fire being lit, but it was clear that Dorothy had been attacked with the hammer, and that had been in John's possession, and he was trying to dispose of it after the attack. And it also seems that some small rumour had been started suggesting it had been Mary Armstrong who had attacked Dorothy and not John. However, no evidence was ever given to support this, and John, as said, was trying to dispose of the murder weapon, so surely he would not have done that if he had not been guilty. Were the jury correct to find him guilty of manslaughter? Well, in this case I believe they were. It does not seem to have been premeditated murder, and John did admit to attacking his wife, just denying that he used the hammer, so I think they had no other option but to find him guilty, but only of manslaughter. But what do you think? Do you think a simple argument over Dorothy not buying John a glass of beer was enough to make him attack and kill her? Do you think he knew what he was doing at the time, or do you think it is possible that in his drunken state he did not realise how much damage he could do with the lathen hammer? Do you think it is possible that some of the witnesses lied, or that they simply did not like John and wanted him sent to prison, or worse, hanged for murder? And finally, do you think the jury was correct to find him guilty of manslaughter, or do you think he should have been found guilty of murder? Do please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I do hope that you have found this sad and tragic story interesting, and I do thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again very soon.